I should have trusted my instincts the moment I saw the cabin door could only be locked from the outside. At the time, though, I was soaked, freezing, and desperate to get out of the storm. That cabin felt like a miracle when I first spotted it through the trees. Looking back now, I'm convinced it was something else entirely. This happened about 8 years ago when I was still doing a lot of solo backpacking trips. Back then, I was in my mid-20s, had plenty of free time, and thought I was a lot tougher than I probably was. A few times a year, I'd pick some remote forest, throw my gear into the car, and disappear into the wilderness for a few days. I loved the isolation. No cell service, no people, no noise, just miles of forest and whatever thoughts happened to be bouncing around in my head. Most of my trips were uneventful. Long hikes, quiet nights, and the kind of peace you don't really find anywhere else. But one trip changed the way I look at the woods forever. It was early fall, and I had chosen a section of national forest that was known for being pretty remote. The kind of place where you could hike all day without seeing another person. I drove out early in the morning and started my hike sometime around noon. The first day went exactly how I hoped it would. The weather was clear, the trail was quiet, and the forest had that cool, crisp smell that only shows up when summer is starting to fade. I hiked until the sun began to drop behind the trees and set up camp near a small stream. That night was perfect. I cooked a simple meal, watched the sky fade from orange to deep blue, and eventually crawled into my sleeping bag. The second day started just as peaceful. I packed up camp and headed deeper into the backcountry. The further I went, the quieter everything became. The trail narrowed and eventually turned into something that looked more like an animal path than a maintained hiking route. That didn't bother me. In fact, it was exactly what I was looking for. By early afternoon, though, the weather started to change. At first, it was subtle. The wind picked up slightly, and the sunlight dimmed as clouds rolled in from the west. I didn't think much of it. I'd hiked through plenty of rainstorms before. But within an hour, it became clear this wasn't going to be a light shower. The wind started pushing through the trees in heavy gusts, bending branches and rattling leaves like 1,000 tiny drums. The temperature dropped quickly, and the sky darkened until it looked more like evening than mid-afternoon. When the rain finally started, it didn't ease in. It slammed down all at once. Within minutes, I was completely soaked. Water poured through the forest canopy and splashed against the ground in sheets. Thunder cracked somewhere in the distance, echoing across the hills. I kept hiking, hoping I'd find somewhere to wait out the storm. That's when I saw the cabin. At first, it looked like nothing more than a dark shape tucked between the trees. But as I got closer, the details became clear. It was a small, one-room structure with weathered wood walls and a metal roof that rattled loudly under the pounding rain. It looked old, really old. The kind of place that might have been built decades ago by hunters or early settlers. Relief hit me instantly. I jogged toward the door and pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled stale and damp, but it was dry. That was all I cared about at the moment. The room was small and mostly empty. A dusty table sat against one wall, and an old chair leaned awkwardly beside it. Near the back of the cabin was a metal cot frame with no mattress. There was also a stone fireplace, though it looked like it hadn't been used in years. I dropped my pack and sat on the floor, catching my breath while the storm hammered the roof above me. For the first 10 minutes, I didn't even bother looking around. I was just grateful to be out of the rain. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and started scanning the room. That's when I noticed a few things that didn't quite add up. First, there was a sleeping bag rolled up near the cot. It didn't look ancient like the rest of the cabin. It looked newer, or at least newer than everything else. Then I noticed a couple of empty cans sitting on the table, along with a plastic water jug. That made me think someone might still use the place occasionally, maybe hunters or other backpackers. But the longer I looked around, the stranger things became. Near the door, the wooden wall was covered in scratches, dozens of them. Some were shallow lines, while others were deep gouges that cut straight through the wood. At first, I assumed it was just damage from age or animals. But when I leaned closer, I realized something unsettling. The scratches were all clustered near the door handle, almost like someone had been desperately clawing at the wall. A strange feeling crept into my stomach. Trying to ignore it, I stepped outside for a moment to look at the door. That's when I saw something that made my skin crawl. The door had a metal bracket on the outside for a padlock. Not on the inside, on the outside. Which meant if someone locked it, whoever was inside couldn't get out. I stared at it for a long moment before stepping back inside. Now my curiosity had fully taken over. The only thing I hadn't checked yet was the window. When I walked over to it, another disturbing detail appeared. The window frame had screws drilled into each corner, holding the glass firmly in place. From the outside, and around the inside edges of the frame were more scratches, deep ones. It looked like someone had tried to pry the window open with their bare hands. That realization hit me all at once. Someone had been trapped inside this cabin, possibly for a long time. I stood there for a while, trying to convince myself I was overthinking things. Maybe the scratches were from animals. Maybe the door latch had been installed for some completely normal reason. But the pit in my stomach wouldn't go away. Still, the storm outside was getting worse, and hiking through lightning and heavy wind wasn't exactly a better option. So, I stayed. For a while, everything seemed quiet. The rain pounded against the roof and wind howled through the trees, but nothing else happened. Then I heard the first sound. A faint scraping noise coming from outside the left wall. At first, I assumed it was a branch rubbing against the cabin, but then came two heavy thumps on the porch. They were too deliberate to be storm noise. My entire body froze. I listened carefully, but the rain was so loud it drowned out almost everything else. After a minute, the noises stopped. I started to relax, convincing myself it had probably been an animal wandering around. Then something leaned against the door, hard. The wood creaked and the latch rattled under the pressure. Whoever, or whatever, was outside was pushing their weight against it. Then suddenly the pressure disappeared. That's when a terrifying thought crossed my mind. If someone was outside, why weren't they coming in? The door wasn't locked. Nothing was stopping them, unless they didn't want to come inside. Unless they wanted me to stay inside. My heart began pounding. I decided right then that I was leaving, storm or not. I rushed to pack my gear, shoving things into my backpack as fast as I could. I was maybe half a minute from the door when something crashed through the window behind me. Glass exploded across the floor. Before I could even turn around fully, flames erupted inside the cabin. The fire spread instantly, too fast, like the walls had been soaked in gasoline. Heat blasted against my back as smoke filled the room. I ran for the door and slammed into it with everything I had. It didn't move. Someone had jammed it from the outside. Panic hit me like a wave. I slammed into it again and again until the wood finally splintered and the door burst off its hinges. I stumbled into the rain and started running. I had only made it about 30 feet when something tackled me from behind. We hit the ground hard. A man was on top of me, grabbing at my throat and trying to choke me. We fought in the mud and rain, slipping and clawing at each other like animals. I managed to shove him off and scramble to my feet. Then I ran. I didn't look back for a while. When I finally did, I saw the cabin fully engulfed in flames behind the trees. The fire lit the forest like some kind of nightmare beacon, and somewhere in the darkness behind me, someone was screaming. I ran until my legs gave out. Eventually, I collapsed under a fallen tree and stayed there for hours, shaking and trying to stay awake. By morning, I found a trail and followed it until I reached a road. A passing driver took one look at me and drove me straight to a hospital. I had burns on my arm and neck, along with cuts and bruises from the fight. The doctors told me I was lucky. They were right. I told the police everything, but without a clear location for the cabin, there wasn't much they could do. No one was ever found. But one thing has stuck with me ever since. That cabin didn't catch fire by accident. Someone had prepared it to burn, and they were waiting for someone like me to walk inside. If you enjoy real horror stories like this, like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Would you have stayed in that cabin? I still remember the exact moment I realized I had made a huge mistake. I was deep in the forest, miles from the nearest road, and for the first time in years, I felt completely powerless. I had been hiking alone for 2 days, chasing that feeling of total freedom you get when you're far off the map. But this time, something about the woods felt wrong. I'm James, and back then, I was in my mid-20s, single, restless, and always looking for adventure. I had been backpacking alone for years, always careful but always chasing the thrill of being truly isolated. That's how I found myself in the Cherokee National Forest that summer. I drove hours, parked at a forgotten trailhead, and started hiking into the backcountry with nothing but my pack, a tent, food for 4 days, and my trusted .308 bolt-action rifle. The first 2 days were perfect. The sun broke through the trees in golden rays, birds sang in the morning, and the stream sparkled like glass. I hadn't seen another soul since the first few minutes on the trail. By the afternoon of the second day, I was far off the main path, hiking along a ridge that seemed to go on forever. That's when the storm hit. At first, it was subtle, just a cool breeze and the distant rumble of clouds building on the horizon. But within an hour, the wind turned sharp and the sky darkened to a bruised gray. Rain began pelting down in sheets and lightning cracked dangerously close. I was carrying a metal frame pack and every strike made me flinch. I started scanning the trees for shelter, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, through the blur of rain, I saw it. A tiny cabin, tucked between thick trees and almost hidden from view. It looked old, decades old, but solid enough to keep me dry. Relief hit me like a tidal wave. I sprinted through the mud, pushed the door open, and collapsed inside. The smell was awful, a mix of mold and old ash, but I didn't care. I just stripped off my drenched clothes and lay on the cold wooden floor. Survival was my only thought. After about 10 minutes, curiosity got the better of me. I flicked on my flashlight and started exploring. There was a cot frame in one corner, a small table, a chair, and a fireplace choked with ash. On the table, I saw a couple of cans and water jugs, and in the corner, a rolled-up sleeping bag that looked newer than the rest of the cabin. That's when I noticed the scratches. Dozens of them, some shallow, some deep, along the door frame and the window. At first, I thought it was just the wear of time, but as I looked closer, it became clear someone had tried to escape. The window had screws driven in from the outside, and the door could only be locked from the outside. My stomach sank. Whoever had been here had been trapped, and the thought that I was now inside it during a thunderstorm made my pulse spike. I debated leaving. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the storm was merciless. I stayed, trying to rationalize that the cabin hadn't been used for years, that the marks were from the past. Then I heard it, scratching against the outer wall. Heavy thumps on the porch. At first, I convinced myself it was just branches or the storm, but my gut told me otherwise. And then, pressure on the door, like someone leaning their full weight against it. The latch rattled once before releasing. My heart slammed against my ribs. Whoever, or whatever, didn't want me to leave. I didn't wait. I grabbed my pack and was moving toward the door when glass shattered behind me. Flames erupted from the window, spreading through the cabin like a wave. The heat hit me instantly. The door was jammed, but somehow I managed to force it open, collapsing onto the wet, muddy ground outside. I ran blindly, my lungs burning, my heart hammering, until I felt someone tackle me. I fought like my life depended on it, because it did. I scrambled free and kept running, only stopping when I found cover under a fallen tree. I stayed there for hours, soaked, bruised, exhausted, listening to the forest. Eventually, I managed to stumble onto a trail and make my way back to civilization. That night taught me never to underestimate the danger that isolation can bring. Someone had clearly set that cabin on fire intentionally. I never went back to solo trips in the Cherokee Forest after that. Fast forward a few years, and I thought I had learned my lesson. But my need for solitude never really faded. I found myself in eastern Kentucky, in the Daniel Boone National Forest, a vast stretch of over 700,000 acres, where it's possible to hike for days without seeing anyone. My life had been stressful, and I just needed a break from everything. 3 nights alone in the forest sounded perfect. The first day was peaceful. I found a flat spot near a creek bed, set up my tent, and enjoyed a quiet evening by the fire. No one around, no sounds except the water and the wind through the trees. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint orange glow outside my tent, a campfire, maybe 200 yards away. I watched for a few minutes, no voices, no movement, just the flickering glow. I shrugged it off, zipped my tent, and tried to sleep. Morning came, and curiosity got the better of me. I hiked toward where I thought the fire had been. Nothing. No fire pit, no ashes, no disturbed ground. The clearing was untouched, like no one had ever been there. My heart started beating faster. I was sure I had seen something, and yet there was no trace. I shrugged it off and continued deeper into the forest. By the second night, the forest felt heavier, older. The canopy blocked out most of the sky, and the silence was almost suffocating. I set up camp and tried to sleep, but around midnight, a loud cracking sound woke me, like a tree snapping in half, followed by a deep thud that vibrated through the ground. I froze, every nerve on edge. Before I could process it, another crash came from a different direction. Two massive trees, fallen, without wind, without storm. My mind raced. That wasn't possible. Trees don't just fall like that without reason. Then came the sound that made me want to run straight into the night. A low, continuous groan, like a growl, a throat clearing, something deliberate. It lasted nearly a minute. I gripped my rifle, heart hammering, listening for any movement. The sound faded, leaving the forest unnervingly quiet. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I investigated. The second tree was enormous, broken in a way I had never seen. The trunk was gouged and splintered with long, irregular marks. Whoever or whatever had done this was incredibly strong. I didn't see it, but I felt it. Something watching. Something patient. The third night was worse. I was on high alert, every rustle of leaves sending adrenaline through my body. Then, as I packed my tent at first light, I saw it. Footprints. Massive, uneven, claw-like impressions pressed into the soft earth. They weren't human, nothing I had ever seen, and they led deeper into the forest, vanishing into thick undergrowth. I left immediately, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes following me. That's the thing about being alone in the woods. You feel exposed, vulnerable, like the forest itself is alive. And sometimes it really is. Even now, years later, I hike solo less often. I still go into the backcountry, still seek solitude, but always with caution, always aware that some things aren't meant to be seen. Because when the forest wants to watch, it will. And when it wants to strike, it does so without warning. If you love spine-chilling true stories, hit like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more terrifying tales. The Fire Watcher in the Woods. I never thought a camping trip could terrify me the way this one did, but it wasn't just fear. It was a creeping, almost physical sense that something unseen was watching, waiting, and planning. I was in my late 20s when this happened. I had been camping alone for years, and I thought I knew the rhythm of the wilderness. I knew when to respect it, when to relax, and when to be cautious. This trip started like any other. I drove out to the Daniel Boone National Forest in eastern Kentucky, a massive expanse of trees and hills, the kind of place where you can hike for days without seeing a single person. My plan was simple: 3 nights alone, no distractions, just me, my tent, and the forest. The first day was perfect. I found a flat spot near a creek, set up my tent, gathered firewood, and had a small fire going by late afternoon. Everything felt right: the smell of the damp earth, the quiet, the way the sun filtered through the leaves. I cooked my dinner, drank a beer, and watched the fire burn down to embers before slipping into my sleeping bag. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night, not to any sound in particular, but because my body simply wouldn't stay asleep. Something felt off. There was a faint orange glow seeping through the walls of my tent. I unzipped the flap and peered into the darkness. About 200 yards away, through the thick trees, there was a small fire. Not a campfire the size of a bonfire, but big enough to illuminate the nearby trunks and brush. I watched, expecting movement, voices, a camper coming to tend the fire, but there was nothing. No shadow, no sound, just the fire flickering as if it existed in isolation. I debated going over, but something told me to stay put. I eventually zipped the tent back up and tried to sleep, though I hardly closed my eyes after that. Morning didn't bring relief. I packed up, curious more than afraid, and hiked toward the spot where the fire had been. 10 minutes through thick underbrush brought me to a small clearing, and there was nothing. No fire pit, no ring of stones, no ash, no evidence that anyone had been there in months. The ground was untouched. I circled the clearing, scanning every angle, convinced I had simply misremembered. But I hadn't. I was positive. I'd seen the fire, and yet the forest showed no trace. I shook it off and continued my hike. The forest grew denser, older, the canopy thickened overhead, and the sunlight barely reached the forest floor. By late afternoon, I found another spot to camp, tucked away beside a slope and surrounded by tall trees. I set up quickly, lit a fire, and settled in. Then it happened. It started with a cracking sound, a massive, bone-shaking snap, like the trunk of a giant tree splitting in half. It echoed through the forest, followed by a deep thud that rattled the ground beneath me. My heart jumped. I stayed perfectly still, trying to identify the direction. Then another crack, louder, coming from a completely different side of the forest. Two trees, falling in the same night, miles apart, and there was barely any wind. There was no logical explanation. I felt my pulse race. I scanned the darkness, straining my eyes for movement, and then came the growl. Low, continuous, almost human but guttural, like something alive, enormous and angry. It went on for nearly a minute without pause. Not a bear, not a bobcat, not anything I'd ever heard. Something deliberate was making that noise, and it was moving. I grabbed my rifle, chambered around, and aimed at the flap of my tent. Every muscle in my body was tense. The sound slowly faded, leaving a silence that was almost worse than the noise. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, I needed answers. I walked toward the spot of the second tree, the one that had fallen closer. It was real, massive, lying at an angle across the slope. Broken branches and splintered wood surrounded it. But what caught my attention was the fracture itself. The wood hadn't broken from wind or natural decay. It looked gouged, ripped in long, uneven lines, like claws or tools had carved through it. I kept moving, inspecting the ground, and realized something worse. There were footprints, deep, elongated, something bigger than a man, following a circular path around the base of the tree. I froze. Whoever, or whatever, had done this was still out there. I turned to leave, but the hairs on my neck stood on end. In the distance, through the trees, I saw a faint glow. Not a fire this time, more like a soft, pulsing light. It wasn't stationary. It moved, weaving through the forest in an impossible steady rhythm, almost floating above the ground. My first thought was another camper, but the movement was too precise, too uniform. I froze. And then I noticed it. Shapes moving with the light. Figures crouched low, darting between trees. I couldn't make out faces, but I could feel eyes on me. My instincts screamed to run, but the thick forest slowed me down. I backtracked to my tent, grabbing my pack and fire extinguisher in case things escalated. The light followed, skimming the trees, never breaking its pattern. I climbed to higher ground, trying to get a better view. That's when I saw them clearly. Two figures, humanoid but not quite human. They moved unnaturally, fluid and quiet, almost floating. The glow seemed to emanate from their eyes. I ran, zigzagging through the underbrush, but every time I looked back, they were closer, gliding without sound. My heart pounded, my lungs burned, and yet I couldn't shake the sensation that the forest itself was aligned with them, bending shadows and shapes to guide me into their path. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes, and finally, I stumbled into a creek bed. Water soaked my shoes, but I didn't care. I kept moving until the first hints of daylight appeared. Exhausted and terrified, I finally made it to a cleared service road. No figures followed. The forest behind me was silent, normal, as if nothing had happened. I never saw the light again. I never saw the figures again. But the marks on the trees, the gouges in the fallen trunks, and the strange, unnatural precision of the light remained burned into my memory. I returned home shaken, unsure if I'd imagined it all. I told myself it was sleep deprivation, my imagination, the stress of isolation. But when I researched reports from that forest, there were whispers, campers who vanished, unexplained lights in the woods, people who swore they'd been stalked by something not human. I still go camping alone sometimes, but I'm never truly alone in the backcountry. I know now that there are things out there, watching, waiting for the right moment. And I can never unsee the glow, the way it moved with intelligence, patience, and intent. The forest taught me a lesson I won't forget. Some lights you follow are not meant to guide you, they're meant to trap you. If you enjoyed these horror stories, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me which story scared you the most. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our regular uploads.